Okay, friends, hello. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for making it. So today we'll be talking about the consciousness, the personality, and the ego. Okay, and this lecture responds mainly to the question of who are we. Okay, we'll get into the esoteric aspect of the consciousness and of occult psychology. Okay. So I want to start with this quote that I put here in the board, because in essence it's one of the goals that we have here in the Gnostic school. So Rafael Vargas says, psychology is the study of the principles, laws, and facts that are intimately related with the revolution of the consciousness or the radical transformation of the individual. Okay, and that's mainly what Gnostic studies propose, to radically change ourselves to expand our consciousness, to be a new person, to be or allow rather the life of the spirit to be present within us, right, and express himself in life. So for this we have to study not regular psychology, but what we call occult psychology. Okay, the branch of psychology that we have now only focuses on the behavior, right, human behavior. But the word psychology itself comes from the Greek, from the word psyche, which is soul, and then logos, which is science or word or knowledge. Okay? So then, for the Greeks, psychology was the science of the soul, the study of the soul. Okay? And it's the actual foundation of the 4 pillars of gnosis that we talked about in lecture 1, right? The 4 pillars of gnosis being the 4 ways to connect with the one truth, okay, or with the truth or with the essence of things. Okay, so psychology is what links science, philosophy, religion, or mysticism, and art. Okay, because without with the psychology, what gives us is the ability of self-reflection. Okay, when we study our own psychology, when we study things, when we reflect on things, what we want to do is to comprehend the profound causes of existence of whatever it is that we're studying, right? So connecting with the essence of things. And for this we need reflection, right? We can use science, we can use philosophy, art, and religion, which are particular spiritual formulas to get to a truth. But as a soul, as a consciousness, we need to reflect on all of that information that we receive, right? And this is what psychology offers to us, or occult psychology. Okay, so we'll begin from here. Now, it is in all of the mythologies around the world, all the cultures have this myth about the battle between the light and the darkness, right? And you see this in every single mythological story. So the light and the darkness represents aspects of ourselves. Okay, remember that through symbolism, man has been trying to express those things that transcend the limitations of language. Okay, this is why we make up symbols and we make up stories to try to express and convey an idea that you cannot really express with limited concepts. Okay, so Gnostic esoteric psychology tells us that first we are a consciousness. Okay, a consciousness which is also the essence or the embryo of the soul, or part of the soul. Okay, in other cultures in the Buddhist tradition, they call it the Buddhata or the psychic material. Okay, so this is our immortal and transcendental aspect, right? What most traditions call the soul, basically. So we have a consciousness, then we also have a personality, and in between that we have something called the animal ego. Okay, this is the ego is the conditioning that has been put on the consciousness. Okay, so the consciousness again is our true individuality. Okay, in our consciousness we have wisdom. We have whatever percentage of love or virtue that we carry within, and is where we find happiness and life. Okay, this is where the consciousness is the one, or the essence, that connects us with our superior self. Okay, so we are the essence. We are the consciousness, the essence, the being himself. So the things that we find, or the qualities of the consciousness, are purity, self-restraint, kindness, integrity, peacefulness, compassion, modesty, and this is represented symbolically, or no, not symbolically, but the Dante talked about in his Divine Comedy, and when he talked about the seven deadly sins, right, the capital sins, which are, according to the Catholic tradition or the Christian tradition, the main psychological aspects that we carry within ourselves, and they all have, or the main virtues, sorry, and they all have their opposing vices. Okay, so we have the virtues, and then we have the vices. That's what Dante talks about. So then we have the aspects of the consciousness are, like I said, purity, which is in relation to chastity, moderation, which we also talked about last week when we talked about need and greed, and really knowing when our needs end and when our greed begins, right? To find a harmonious relation with the five senses, so that we're not just always being dragged by the senses of the physical body, right, or by the needs of others, by the need of society, etc. That those things that impede our the growth of the essence, okay, or the consciousness. So we have generosity, we have will, we have meekness, charity, and humility. Okay, in opposition to vices of lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. Okay, so our consciousness needs development and growth. Okay, and we do this by awakening to the present moment. So from moment to moment, we need to awaken our consciousness, like we do when we meditate, when we practice mindfulness, right? When we self-remember, and we try to connect with that aspect of us that is transcendental, okay? That is immortal. And for this, the only thing that you have to do is simply stop what you're doing, simply breathe in, feel yourself, relax, right? When we do this, you automatically begin to feel relaxation. Okay? Relaxation is one of the aspects of serenity, which comes from the consciousness, from the essence. So then, in opposition to the consciousness, we have what's called the animal ego, which is, in the Buddhist tradition, they talk about psychological aggregates, because it is a psychological it's a psychological aspect that aggregates itself to the consciousness. So we have our own consciousness, and think of yourself as a child, right? When you're first born, the first few years of your life, when you don't actually act under any conditioning, you're just free, you're innocent, right? You're out there exploring the world, and then your parents or culture in general start to tell you this is bad, this is good, and then they give you concepts, this is that, this is a tree, this is a house, right? All those things. So from that point on, the kid begins to see life through the eyes of the parents, right? Of whatever culture has been teaching to the child. So this is a form of conditioning of the consciousness. So from that point on, the consciousness, it's like the consciousness puts on a pair of glasses, right? Where these glasses, if these glasses are red, then you begin to see everything red, right? If the glasses are green, then you see everything as green, right? So then the essence, as it begins to grow, at some point it stops to grow because culture begins to bottle the essence into concepts, into ideas, etc., right? So we now live in a culture, for instance, which is completely okay, or it's actually great when someone is very proud, right? When someone has a lot of greed and avarice, right? And this is what our economy is founded upon, right? And greed and avarice and envy, right? It's like George Carlin says, you can't take away envy, because if you take away envy, then the entire system will collapse, right? because that's what keeps the economy going. You see someone that has something and you desire that, you want to have it also, right? Even if you don't need it, you just want it. You just want to have it. Why? Because it gives a particular sensation, and you want to experience that sensation. Maybe it's not only a pleasurable sensation to drive a nice, beautiful car, but it also gives you social status, right? So it has to do with building or adding more to what we call the ego. So then the ego is a psychological aggregate, okay? Something that conditions the consciousness or programs the consciousness, right? And this is why I love that movie, The Matrix, again, because it's all about that, right? Neo fighting against Myth. Myth is part of the program, and it's all about programming, right? And in one of the scenes, Morpheus is talking to Neo and saying, you know, all these people, they're all in the system still, and some of them are not ready to be unplugged, right? Some of them, there are some people that you talk to and they're not ready to accept certain truths, right? Certain truth about even government, right? Some people don't accept the fact that this government might not have your best interest in their hands, right? So in the ego, we see multiplicity as opposed of our individuality, and you can see this when you really begin to explore your psyche, and you see how we're all different people within ourselves. Like we have a bunch of different. That's what we call it, the ego or the I. We have different I's. I am a soccer player. I am a gnostic. I am a Christian. I am a Catholic. So you act according to all of those things, right? So then that is why it is said that anyone that has ego has no individuality. The only individuality that we have is in the consciousness. So the Gnostic tradition says that everyone is born, or most people are born with 3 to 5% of free consciousness. Okay, and the 97 or 95% of the rest of the consciousness is actually under the influence of the ego. It's under the conditioning, right? So our first job as a consciousness when we're here is to liberate all of those parts, all of that consciousness from the ego, right? So to liberate the consciousness from being lustful, from being glutton, from being greedy, etc., so that then we can begin to act, or these virtues begin to flourish within us. Okay, so instead of pride, we become humble, and humble is, I guess, a concept that is very misunderstood out there. Where some people see it as being humble as being poor, right? Or it's also a synonym of simply like bowing your head. But humility has to do with having the correct attitude in any circumstance. You don't feel either below or above anyone in any given circumstance. And one of the greatest example of this is the Dalai Lama, because he you see him meet presidents, you see him meet poor people on the street, people that come to pay homage to him, you know, for what he represents and everything. And he's always the same calm and nice person that he is, right? So he doesn't feel pride, or he doesn't feel underneath anyone at the same time, right? Because the consciousness sees everyone through the lenses of the consciousness. So everyone that is here present, I try to see everyone as a consciousness, right? I don't try to see you as the president, CEO of a particular company, or I'm your manager and I'm your boss, and you should do what I say, and those kinds of things. Even if that is what is happening, where, you know, if you work and you're the boss of certain people, that doesn't mean that you have to feel better than that person, right? You're simply fulfilling a role, right? Which anybody really can fulfill. Like we just have this idea that we're all so important, and that when we die, the world's gonna die also. But you know, that's not true. So it's just like the logic of the ego, really. You know, a lot of the egoic behaviors and rationale really has no transcendental foundation. Okay, that's it. That's the main difference. The ego also is ignorance, and of course hate, unhappiness, and death. Ignorance because all the wisdom is contained in the consciousness, right? Remember that the consciousness is what grants us comprehension of things, right? The mind alone can only give us understanding so that we can go into the next step, into comprehension, right? Comprehension is really what allows us to penetrate into the essence of things, right? Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry, I'm late.
It's okay. No worries. Okay. It is said that at one point we had, since the beginning of time, we had no ego, right? And all of the ancient myths always talk about a period in humanity where we were all innocent and we did whatever God told us to do, right? We were innocent, had no bad things within ourselves, etc., right? We have the story of Adam and Eve, and many different traditions that talk about basically the same thing, where we are a consciousness, we were a soul, we were all in paradise, everything was nice, everything was good, we had everything, and then at some point something happened and we left paradise or we were expelled from it. The Kabbalists say that we actually expelled the paradise from within us, or we expelled God from within us, or that divine aspect from within ourselves. So all of these things, all of these myths are just trying to tell us that there is this part within us that is pure, right? That is humble, that is charitable, that is peaceful, that's happy. But at some point, we decided to begin to experience the other aspect of life, right? The darkness or the dark aspect of life. And this is why, for example, in the Bible, in the story of Adam and Eve, they said that Adam and Eve were immortal beings, and they had no illnesses. And everything was good. But when they left paradise, now you see another type of humanity. You see a humanity now that suffers, a humanity that has to go and work for the things that they need, and a humanity that finds death because they lose their immortality, right? And of course, this is all symbolic of the consciousness, because we begin to lose touch with our own particular consciousness. So then this is, in here we see the great mythological battle portrayed in every culture, right? We see, for example, the Christ versus the devil. We see in the Egyptian tradition, we see Horus versus Seth. We see in the movie The Matrix, we see Neo versus Myth. In the Hindustani tradition, we see, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, we see Arjuna battling against the armies, battling against his enemies. And what's interesting about the story of Arjuna is that he's not battling random armies and random families. They're all his family, right? And this is so symbolic of the ego, because we have made the ego our family, right? This is us. We've made, or we feel ourselves as the ego. So that is why when we begin to talk about occult psychology and getting rid of the ego and battling against the hate that you have within, against the pride that you have within, against the laziness that you have within, then that becomes a battle, right? Because you begin to try to be the essence, and now you begin to see those things that up until that point were the foundation of your life. Now you begin to see how those concepts, those ideas, those ways of interpreting life only create disharmony and suffering around you, right? Not only with yourself, but with those around you. Okay, so then that is. I'll hand out at the end of the class a little comparative, comparison between one of the chapters of the Bhagavad Gita that has to do with Arjuna, and for example the Gospel of Saint Paul in the Christian tradition. And here we'll see how really two different traditions have or talk about the same things, right? and that is why that is the urgency of going beyond the religious forms and connecting with the religious principles, right? We also have in the Lord of the Rings, we have the battle for Middle Earth, right? So you have the army of the light, the good, and then you have the armies of what's the guy, Mordor, right? The bad guy. Yeah. And Middle Earth has to do with our physical body. Okay, so we have the consciousness and we have the ego within ourselves, and they're both fighting to have control of this physical body, right? And that is why in the next class we'll talk about the human machine and the different centers that we have, and how the ego and how the consciousness gets into the physical body and makes us do things that we don't necessarily agree with, or that it's not part of our or things that we'd like and we want to do, but we still have these urges to do these things, right? We all have all of these things within us, even if we don't like to see them or we don't like to accept them. But we do have them, and one of the things that happens when we don't begin to study our psychology and to accept the fact that we have all these things and work upon them, then we begin to repress certain things, right? And that's why you see that at the later in life, you see people that start to do certain things. For example, you see politicians like I can name a bunch, but Elliot Spitzer, for instance, right? He was this whole scandal where he was caught having extramarital relationships, and the interesting thing, or the ironic part of that story, was the fact that when he was not the government, he had another, I think he was a controller of New York State or something like that. He created strict laws against prostitution. And then years later, we find out that he was actually getting involved in prostitution, right? So what does that show us? It shows us that there's a duality between the person, right? Within the person, right? There's one aspect in the person, maybe the consciousness, right, that wants peace and harmony and good things for the community, but there's also this shadow, which Carl Gustav Jung talks about in psychology, right? The shadow that if you don't work with it, eventually it overtakes the consciousness, okay? And this is the importance of psychology, because we want to comprehend the profound causes or the essence of our behaviors, okay? So somewhere in between this is the personality. The personality, the word personality comes from Latin word persona, which means the mask of the actor. Okay? The personality is a form of expression that we create since we're born. A form of expression where we express the values of the consciousness or the values of the ego, depending on how conscious you are in any particular moment. Okay? So if you're conscious in a particular situation and you're alert, then when something happens, when an external stimuli comes to you, you will react with it in a harmonious way. If you are vibrating with the consciousness, right? You're vibrating with these harmonious behaviors, right? But if you're not present and if you're not in a state of self-awareness, then your mechanical aspect comes and behaves for you, right? And creates action. And this is what, and when that happens, you're expressing the values of the ego, okay? The personality is formed by mechanical imitation, okay? Since we're born, we begin to imitate our parents, we begin to imitate friends at school, etc., right? So the personality is 100% imitation and 100% mortal, because we created the personality at one point, and the personality will die when we die, right? But when we actually physically, when we lose our physical body, our consciousness continues, okay? Along with actually the egos that we have created. but our personality dies. And then we're born again into another body, and we bring back the same egos, but now you create a different personality, right? You're not the same person that you were in previous lives. And the with relation to the ego and how we all have different personalities that express different values. We all have the same egos within ourselves, but we just express them differently, right? Some people express more anger than others, or some people express their anger passively and others more actively, right? Etc. So we, occult psychology tells us that we're all the same, okay, from a spiritual perspective and from a human perspective. We're also the same. We all have the same vices, and we also have the same virtues. So what makes one person different than the other is whether that person chooses to be more virtuous than the other person, right? And this is what we like to encourage everyone to do here at Gnosis, is to begin to explore that immortal and transcendental aspect within themselves that has individuality, that has wisdom, that has love and happiness, which create harmony within the environment. So that's one aspect, and then the other aspect is to let us know that we have a particular percentage of the consciousness that is trapped and conditioned by the ego, and therefore we should use the percentage of liberated consciousness that we have to liberate the rest of the consciousness, right? And it's not an easy task, but it's something that we can all do. I always like the metaphor of the cave from Plato's Republic, right? Where he says that he basically explains the ego and the consciousness, or rather the state of the consciousness before finding illumination, because he says the consciousness is asleep, like if you imagine a cave where there are people tied to a wall, right? They're chained to a wall, and then let's say this is the wall, you're chained to the wall, and then there's fire, and then there are people that pass in front of that fire. So when they pass in front of the fire, their shadow is reflected on the wall that is in front of you, right? So then the people that are here see that as the reality, and they think that that is the reality, when in fact they're only seeing the results of something else. Okay, and this is what we see when we're here in the physical world. We see the phenomena of things. We only see the result of things that originate somewhere else. So it also connects to the way that to this modern medicine that we have, the medical establishment that we have right now, where it's more concerned about treating the symptoms than treating the illness itself, right? And it relates. It's the same metaphor. Most of us, when we go to the doctor, right, or let's say you have a headache, right, you take an aspirin, and then your headache goes away. But what was it that was causing the headache? It was certainly not the lack of aspirin in your system, right? It was something else. But we just treat the symptom itself, right? Instead of getting to the cause of things. So then, in this same metaphor, Plato says that when one of those slaves is liberated and he goes out into the world and he sees the real world, and he sees objects that are three-dimensional, right? And he's so amazed by what he sees, he comes back to the cave to try to liberate the other slaves. And then he starts to tell them, this is how it is out there. This is what's happening. Like, objects are actually like three-dimensional, blah, blah, blah. And he says that the reaction of the slaves are not enthusiasm, they're rather afraid, right? Because they think that he just went crazy. And this is one of the states that we are when we are under the influence of the ego. That's why we need to explore the consciousness, to explore that other that transcendental aspect of ourselves. Okay, and this begins by the re-education of the personality. Because we've been conditioned, we've been trained, even if we don't like to accept it, we've been conditioned and trained to be in a particular way, to act in a particular way, and to even take all of these teachings from a particular perspective, right? And this is why we have so many masters of wisdom that have come and try to teach us harmony and peace, and we take their teachings and we transform them, and we enslave humanity, and we use them for to empower ourselves, right, and make others slaves, which is completely the opposite of what they came to teach. So, you know, the only logical explanation is that we're not interpreting their teachings from the correct with the correct perspective, or with the correct philosophical principles, right? So this is in essence what this lecture is about, and if anything, it's an invitation for us to begin to study ourselves and to begin to study the root causes of our behaviors, so that we can begin to see why we are in particular circumstances that we are, right? We've been talking about how the exterior or the external aspect of life, it's only a reflection of your internal states, right? So if you're not able to see those things within yourself, begin to see the circumstances that surround your life, right? If you find yourself constantly in places where there's a lot of where there are a lot of quarrels going on, there's a lot of fighting between people, right? And in places where there's a lot of vanity, where there's a lot of greed or gluttony. I don't know if anyone works in Wall Street. No, I don't think so. All right. So you know, if you begin to observe your environment, you'll begin to see what you have within. Next time that you see something in someone else that you don't like, stop 1 minute and reflect and say, "Huh, that person has something that I really don't like, right? That's annoying me." So next time you see that, just say, "Okay, how do I have that? And in what aspect do I have it? Or how do I express that?" Right? Because let's say the person is an angry person, is constantly yelling at people, and you don't yell at people, but you are angry at people all the time, right? But you're just passive, right?
Yeah. My mom was just telling me that about Alexander. She was like, you know, maybe he acts that way with you because he's very aggressive, he's very angry. So maybe you need to think about it and see if you're, you know, reflecting something
Right.
to him. So just like, okay,
Typical.
you're telling me now, so I mean that I have to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, we tend to project on others the things that are our subconscious. We tend to project our subconscious onto others, and they pick that up, you know, consciously or unconsciously. So, yeah, okay. Any questions? Any comments?
With regards to the last thing you're saying, what do you think about, like, you know, spiritual masters who still interact with people who have deep animal ego issues, but it's not necessarily reflecting them because they're perfected, but they still do interact with these people. But you're saying that everything is a reflection of the inner, so
yeah. Well, we all have, even after you eliminate all of the ego, all of the condition, that's still there in potentiality, because you still have the choice of acting that way. See, and they say that one of the causes, or the real cause of the fall, which is to fall from our Edenic state or pure state, is because of the mind, because the mind also has desire, and that is why the Buddha specifies that the ego is not just desire, but it's desire attachment, right? So it's natural for you to feel desire, but whether you choose to indulge in that desire and become attached to it, that's a different story, right? So then, yeah, we all have that within ourselves. And at some point also, once you eliminate your entire ego, and now we're getting into like really esoteric ideas, and it's said that when you eliminate your entire ego, you are given the option of leaving this this realm, and it's called, so it's the wheel of samsara, which is, so the ego is what keeps us locked into the Buddhist wheel of samsara, which is the what we have right there, that wheel, where it's like paradise and all not paradise, but the universe, right? Everything, the universe with all of its laws, we're here because the ego wants to satisfy particular desires that he has, right? And that's why it drags the consciousness to this place back and forth. But once you eliminate your ego, you have the ability to simply leave this state. And there are those masters, those spiritual masters that know that their knowledge can actually help others liberate themselves. So then they choose to come back, or they choose to stay here. Okay, and this is the mystery behind reincarnation, and that the one that, or the people that reincarnate are the masters, the ones that have eliminated the ego. The ones that have not eliminated the ego, they simply return and return and return, right? The ones who reincarnate actually choose when, where, and how they're going to be born. We have no choice in the matter, right? So then it's just something that happened mechanically due to karma, due to recurrence, etc. So that, you know, that explains that aspect, right? And you know, I guess seeing it from a more like human aspect, it's like, let's say if you liberate, if you're very poor and you live in the projects, right, and then you make it, right, and then what do? You have the option of not going back to that project and not relate yourself with those people anymore, or you can go back there and still be in touch with them and try to help them ascend, right? So this is what masters do, and again, it's always there. The behavior is always there in potentiality. So you always have the capacity, or the capacity to create the ego again once you have eliminated it, which is dumb, but we do it sometimes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we do things in life and we learn our lesson and we don't do that behavior again, and then later again we do it, like, oh man, I did that again. I knew I wasn't supposed to do that, you know. But you know, that's just the nature of one of the natures of humans, and the nature of the mind. It's curiosity and desire. And once we are able to learn how to manage that desire, how to control it, then we can completely liberate ourselves. Okay, not only from disharmonious relationships, but even from illnesses illnesses and improve our health if we change our behaviors, etc. Okay, so meditation is important because meditation gives us the capacity to reflect, to open our psyche and study our psyche. Okay, and that's why meditation is really the foundation of it, because meditation is, or through the practice or the tool of meditation, the discipline of meditation, what we're trying to do is to really comprehend the why, the where, and the how of things, which can put us back into the state of religare, which is which comes from the Latin, which means to reunite, right? And that's in essence what the world religion means. That is what yoga means to reunite. Okay, so once we are able to understand and to comprehend the causes, the profound causes of existence and the essence of things, then we have the option of reuniting with that. Right? Okay, so let's all try to do that. How about it? Cool. All right.